Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, a podcast to encourage, educate, and equip you to care for children and youth through adoption, foster, and kinship care. Hosted by an adoptive mom with over 22 years of kinship and adoptive parenting experience. She's on this journey with you. Please welcome Sandra Flach.
And whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. That is Colossians 3:17. I am your host, Sandra Flach. Welcome to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey, where my joy is to encourage and equip you for your parenting journey. As an adoptive mom for over 26 years, I get it. My husband and I have been raising 5 kids, from a kinship adoption to international adoptions, kids with trauma histories, kids with prenatal exposure to alcohol. I know how both challenging and yet joy-filled this journey can be, and I hope that this podcast will become an invaluable resource for you. Today, I am pleased to bring you a husband and wife duo as our guests. Will and CarrieAnn Standfest are dedicated parents with over 2 decades of hands-on parenting experience, raising 8 forever children through biological, foster, adoption, and international orphan hosting. As emerging experts in connection-based parenting, they have navigated the complexities of trauma and mental health diagnoses within their large family. Will and CarrieAnn are passionate about helping parents build meaningful relationships with their children, which led them to co-create the Connected Parenting Minute, which is a podcast that I have been following. It is a way that they encourage parents and strengthen families, sharing the best of what they have learned to guide others to create the less stressed, more connected homes we desire. So please welcome Will and CarrieAnn Standfest. Hey, guys.
Hi, Sandra. So good to see you.
Hey, Sandra.
I am so excited to have you guys on the show because we got to meet at Replanted back in Chicago back in October. You were very gracious to drive me all around between the hotel and the conference itself, which, you know, I had been speaking with Ryan and Kayla, and Ryan said, "Oh, we'll take care of your transportation. Don't rent a car." And then he gave me to you guys.
That was so fun. I feel like we were giving you rides, but I felt so blessed just to get the opportunity to sit and chat with you. Oh my gosh, it was so fun.
I had fun. I was thrilled. And they were just to get them out of hot water, they were actually in a different hotel down the road, but we were all at the same hotel. So yeah, we had fun, and I greatly appreciate all of that. And I'm excited now for our listeners to get to know you guys if they don't know you already. So
no, I'm excited.
Yeah,
this will be good.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I always love to start with my guest's adoption story. And I know you guys have done orphan hosting, foster care, adoption. You have bio kids. So what started it all?
Boy, it's interesting because we were talking about this earlier, but I even back before we were engaged, adoption was something we talked about. And so I don't know. I mean, I remember being in high school being like, yeah, I think that's something important I want to do someday and something I'm interested in. And so we met when I was in college, and as part of our journey of getting to know each other and getting engaged, we both said, yeah, we kind of want to have a couple of kids, but adoption's important to us and something we want to do in the future and all that. And so fast forward into our marriage, we've had 6 biological kids total. And so there was a gap in there a couple of times where it was a couple of years and we're like, okay, do we stop? Do we, is this the time? Do we move forward? Where we actually went through and talked to some adoption agencies. And then we kind of went back and had some more bio kids. It was a whole journey for us.
Well, we got married pretty early. I think I was 19. And so, we sat down, we had our whole life planned out. And then, of course, God made things go the way that he wanted to. So I think when we first started really considering it, we had two biological kids, and we went through the whole process. we went through the state training. We had decided that adopting out of the what's called Minnesota Waiting Children's Program. So those were kids that had already experienced a TPR, typically older kids, sibling groups. And that was just really on our heart, because we talked about, well, do we want to foster? Do we want, is infant adoption a thing? And really our heart behind it was that we know that there's kids that feel like they maybe weren't chosen, or, that there was something going on. And we knew nothing about trauma the way that we do now, but we were willing to step into that space. And again, we went through this training, we were ready to submit our paperwork, and then we found out we were pregnant. We're like, okay, I guess God's saying pause. And then
saying not yet. And
not yet. So we kept learning and we kept digging into it, because it was not something that was going away. Like, we knew that this was going to be part of our story at some point. So we had 4 more kids.
Yes. Yeah. So we had 2 kids. We got ready to submit the paperwork, found out we were pregnant. We had 4 more kids. And then we decided, you know what, I think we're done with the BioKid thing. I think my wife was more specifically said, I'm done with pregnancy things,
Yeah. Surprisingly, having 6 children, I actually really did not like being pregnant, but whatever. Wow. I love the kid part was fun.
Yeah.
And so we said, okay, well, 6 kids, we're done. And we actually started looking into different things. We heard about orphan hosting. We said, okay, this is something we can look into. And we did. And we actually did that 2 summers in a row, where we had kids from Ukraine actually come and live with us for the summer. And that was an incredible experience,
because it really kind of introduced us to just something that was always important to us, is this idea that these kiddos who have a TPR, termination of parental rights, if you don't know the acronym, these are kiddos that feel like they've got nowhere to go. They've got no permanency, they've got no home or no family, is what they feel like. And so it always broke our hearts, and we always wanted to get involved in that. But part of that process of adopting an older kiddo, they wanted our kiddos to be older. And so the orphan hosting organization was more comfortable with us when we had our sixth kiddo was still only like 2 or 3 when we did our first hosting experience. And they were more comfortable with that because there were older kiddos in the home, and they had spent more time getting to know these children that we were going to host. And so that was something we were able to do when our youngest was still 2 or 3. And it was an incredible experience, because that kind of forced us to be like, okay, we're going to have kiddos with trauma in our home for 6 or 8 weeks this summer. Like, we got to figure out what we're going to do.
So we binged on a lot of podcasts, and that's actually how we found Ryan and Kayla's podcast. And we're like, what do we not know? It would just put us such in a mindset of, let's learn all of the things right now so we can be ready to be able to love these kids well. And it was, for a season. So we got to, so to speak, practice that. And the first kids we had were really, they were not typical of.
We call them the unicorn children, kids, where
they were really poured into in their orphanage that they were in Ukraine, and it was really, they met their mental health needs. They were really investing in the kids and stuff like that, and so it was a good experience in a lot of ways, but it gave us a lot of things to consider and to work through and figure out, and a lot of learning on our part.
Well, and it made it very real for our kids, because as we're going into foster care and adoption, it's important with kids in the home. And from our perspective, it's important that the kids are on board too, because it's going to be a whole experience. Like, it's not just something that we as parents are going through, it's something the whole family is experiencing.
Because by this time our oldest was like 14, and so he had some things to say about it, and thankfully all of our kids at the time were very much on board. Like, this was a family thing we were doing together, and so we got to do fun things together, and it was a positive experience. And so they really
it really opened their eyes, because to them it's no longer, there's kiddos out there that need a family. We met Naisha and Nadia, and they don't have they at the time they didn't have a family to go home to, and they're like, that's silly. Like, why can't they just live with us? And so, like, it just grabbed our kids' hearts. It was a beautiful thing,
Wow. So, yeah. Did you host the same kids from Ukraine both summers?
So we actually didn't. The first summer we hosted their 2 sisters. And then the next summer, we ended up hosting 2 different sisters, and it was a completely different experience. And so it gave us kind of 2 ends of the spectrum, because looking back, we have a high suspicion that there was probably a lot of FASD going on with the kids that we hosted the second year. And it was really hard.
It was hard.
It was different, but it was hard. So it gave us a little bit of that perspective of, okay, because everybody hears the good stories, the harder stories, people sometimes are a little less willing to share. And, these are these kids, the stories belong to the kids. And so you want to be respectful of that. But as the parents, sometimes feeling like I'm the only one that's having a really, really hard time is very isolating, and it can be very discouraging. And so, there's this balance we play between, well, what do you share? What do you not share? But overall, it was a very challenging summer, but it was very redemptive in the fact that we recognized there was a lot of places we had to grow, and it was us that had to grow. It wasn't because of the children. And so that was very insightful and helped us learn a lot that second summer.
Yeah. Well, I think it's wonderful that you knew enough before you hosted the first time to do some research and listen to those podcasts, and found Ryan and Kayla North's podcast, the Empowered Parent podcast, correct? And because I know when we our first experience with bringing a child into our home was a kinship adoption. We first had custody of a little girl who was 8. She was a relative, and we had nothing. Like, we didn't even know we should be looking at anything. We just thought, oh, we're parents. We have 3 biological kids. We know how to parent, and we'll parent her the same way. And which it was pretty disastrous, but we did eventually go on and adopt her, and she's in her 30s now, and we have a good relationship with her. But we just made all of the mistakes over the years with her because we did not know anything about trauma, and we didn't know anything about prenatal exposure, and we didn't know we needed to know anything about those things. So I love the fact that you guys kind of went in with some open eyes there, and better equipped than we were. So did you ever end up adopting any of the kids that you hosted?
So we did not. At the time, part of the program that we were in was more for advocacy and to just give the kids another experience. And we had talked about it, if international adoption would be part of our story. Like, you ask yourselves those questions. And I was really strongly convicted that I kind of wanted to stay in country. Like, there's a lot of need, right? But there's also a lot of need, like, right in our own backyard mentality. Yeah. And so we said, you know what, I think we're going to really focus on, if it had worked out, if God had called us to that, we would have been open to it. But, just looking at a blank slate and saying, okay, which do we choose? We're like, let's go with domestic from foster care. And so we, after we had hosted the second time, we went ahead and started getting licensed through an agency to adopt out of those waiting children in our home state.
Yeah, and so that was a whole process too, that we were going through the home study and answering every intrusive question you could imagine. Yes. And all that. But we had a lovely social worker, and she really worked with us and got us the kiddos that we hosted the second summer. Probably left the end of July, or maybe it's middle of July or something like that. And so then I think our foster care license was approved in like November or December of that year. And so it was several month process. But then once we got that approved, then it was, again, our hearts was teenagers and sibling groups, like kiddos that likely live within a few miles of our home that don't ever know where to go. And so we started looking through lists of waiting kids, and it was a process.
That was a process because the way that the program in Minnesota works is that, you could be matched with a waiting child. And at the time, I think there was upwards of 800 children on like the waiting children's program. And I think between, all the children that we asked about, we probably asked, by the time kids were placed in our home, we probably asked about over 150 children. So there was a lot. And now, our family specifically, I kind of have this theory, and, give or take truth or not, we had a lot of kids already in the home. And so I think a lot of social workers are very skeptical. Wow, I can say words. We're not optimistic about the idea of us adding any more children to the home because, and logistically, that makes sense. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of needs. Bringing children with higher needs into the home could, potentially result in a disruption. And so I understand, I have grace for that. But I also know our family and the capacity that we had. And so it was a little discouraging to keep asking about kids and then not be told, well, no.
Yeah,
And
because the process in Minnesota is basically we create like a little family profile, and then our social worker submits it to their social worker, and the social workers talk, and then we get a response from the child social worker of, yes, we'd like to know more about your family or meet you, or no, I don't think this is a good fit. And then just to kind of protect the kiddos from this. Oh, somebody asked about you. Oh, they're not interested. Oh, somebody asked about you. Oh, like, because that would be painful. That'd be a really hard thing. And we're the adults, so we get to experience the ups and downs of that process. And so then this takes us to probably March, right? Because out of those 150 kids, we had like 2 actual meetings with social workers. Neither of those really went forward. We did meet one kiddo, but she was an older kiddo, and it was in Minnesota. They have the prerogative that once you reach a certain age, that if she meets us and she's like, I don't think this is a good fit, that's it.
They could say no.
They can say no. And
that happened.
That was a hard process.
That was a hard process. But in March of 2020, a friend of a friend, it was like one of those things where, it was definitely God at work, said, hey, are you still, open to kiddos? And we're like, yeah. And we made a couple of phone calls and talked to a couple people. And 2 weeks later, we had 2 kids move into our house. And
they didn't have a TPR.
They were in foster care. And so that's not what we intended necessarily. We were open to fostering, but absolutely open to fostering because we did do respite and
we've
stuff
done
like
respite and a few other things in this whole process. A year and a half long process or whatever it was.
And then what now our 2 children moved in, and then COVID happened. And so that was a whole thing. We're like, okay, because these are school-aged kids, they're already have their schools and all that. And so we're like, okay, well, they'll be at school during the day. It'll be a slow, like, getting to know you process. And I kind of joke, and like, when God was like, and 24/7 bonding all the time.
Yeah.
Like, that's your gift. So it was definitely an adjustment.
Wow. And so these 2 kids, are they the kids that you went on to adopt?
Yes. So that was about,
so they moved in, like I said, March of 2020. And then it was probably, I think it was December of 2020 is when the court finally issued the TPR, the termination of parental rights. And so, like, we went through visits, we went through interacting with bio parents, we went through court meetings, like, the whole process through foster care and the termination. And then the spring of the following year of 21, then they like, oh, look, we found some bio family. And then that was a whole process to go through all that to figure out, well, does the court want to go with the bio family? Do they want to stay with us? Whatever. And then finally in December of 21, so like a year and a half after the kiddos moved in, then they finalized with us. And so we finalized, and then those 2 now kind of make up our 8 forever children.
Yeah. So how old were the kids when you adopted them?
Well, when they moved in, they had just turned 9 and 12.
Okay.
And so,
so a year and a half later it would be.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
10 and 13 approximately.
Yeah, we can go with 9 and 12. I know I can't. Don't ask me how old. I have 8 kids too, and don't ask me how old any of them are. I do know their birth dates, but then to calculate and do the math is like, I know how old the younger 2 are who still live home, but I have, like, my oldest is, I think, 35-ish. So
there you go.
And everybody in between. So I'm like, I don't know, but I know your birth date. So that's important to know. So what was the adjustment like? Because, like, you did that research, you knew that there was trauma. I don't know if you knew anything about prenatal exposure to alcohol and what that is like. But what was that, what were you experiencing as the kids were the honeymoon phase is over, COVID is over, and here you all are. And what was that like?
So actually, I'm going to touch on the prenatal alcohol exposure. It was funny because when we went through training, because there's like a 16 or 20-hour training for Minnesota. And we've gone through it twice because we went through it way back when, and then we had to redo it.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, that was the one thing that I said, I do not want the fetal alcohol. Like, let's, because they ask you, like, what are you willing to deal with? What are the behaviors? Right. All these things. I'm like, I am good with pretty much anything except prenatal alcohol exposure. And so, like, okay. And that actually wasn't something that we actually helped get to that point of understanding where our kids were with that when they were in our home. So it wasn't something we knew beforehand, but it's, knowing the statistics now and all that stuff, it's kind of like, that's just part of the story.
That might have been a little silly, a little innocent to think that would be something we could completely avoid in the foster care world,
But as far as the adjustment stuff, I think the biggest thing that I try to tell parents, and because I was so completely caught off guard, was that I felt like there were strangers in my home.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I didn't expect, like, because we had gone through bio kids, and there's like all this, expectation because in our story, we already had kids. We knew what it was like to bring them home and you get to know them, and, they're just part of the story and anticipate that. But when our kids came into our home and were there, there's an adjustment period, right? Okay, like there's somebody else here. I have to take somebody else in consideration. I hear their voice, all these different things. But it took me a really long time to be like, not completely feel like, oh, there's a stranger in my house. And I was surprised by that. I didn't expect that because I just anticipated, well, eventually it'll just feel like everybody, is here and everybody belongs and stuff. And they do, but it just took me a lot longer than I thought it would. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it even still strikes me. I hear a voice and I'm like, oh, right. And they've been in our home for almost 5 years at this point. And so it's just funny because I think I felt guilty about that for a long time. I'm like, gosh, I'm a horrible mom. I'm not, just loving them unconditionally the way that I'm supposed to. And I don't feel all the feelings that I'm supposed to, but I've had a lot of grace for myself and understanding that, what, in each moment, I love them well when I can, and I have grace for myself when I'm like, ooh, that feeling just isn't there right now, and that's okay. So that was one of the biggest things I think I had to adjust to.
Yeah, for sure. I remember feeling that too. Like there's just that little bit of on edge, and because when our kiddos moved in, the older boy was, he was almost 13, mm-hmm. And having a 13-year-old boy move into your home, you're like, I don't know what this kid does at night. I don't know how he sleeps. I don't know, like we can probably, like, how much can we trust him? Is he gonna like get into trouble? It's like all the things that you start worrying about that become very real when the kiddos stayed in your home. And so it was quite an adjustment period, and it's it was more than we were expecting, I guess, is probably the easiest way to say that. But
do you think, because I experienced this when our daughter, who came in through kinship, she was 8 going on 9, and we didn't know anything about trauma. So we didn't understand that the behaviors that we were actually dealing with were not willful or intentional, but really a symptom of the trauma, possible prenatal exposure. But I was taking a lot of those because, being the stay-at-home mom, and we homeschooled. We weren't homeschooling at the time at first, but, I was at the brunt of it all the time and took it all because my husband was at work. So I found that I was having a hard time, feeling the warm fuzzies toward her because I was dealing with these behaviors and these issues and things that felt like, defiance. Like anything I asked her to do, she didn't do. Stuff I told her to not do, she did. And so it was just kind of always felt like, that butting of heads, and so then I wasn't feeling the love. I mean, I loved her, because I knew I was supposed to. I loved her on that level, but I wasn't feeling the love, and then feeling guilty that I wasn't feeling the love.
Oh, so much. And I think, I mean, even now that's a struggle, because I think for me, and this is kind of how I make the rationale in my head, is as a parent, I want the best for all of my children.
Right.
And, I see particular behaviors or things, especially like social with our FAS kids, and I want to help them. Like I feel like my heart is in a good place. I want to help them see how to relate to people better, how to take care of themselves, how to, do the daily things that they're going to need at some point in their life, and so I'm instantly right there to correct them, to help them along, and that, so I get into this mindset of I'm always correcting, I'm always trying to like get them to do the right thing. And then I don't see the good things. Like I have to be so intentional about cultivating good things with them. And it's hard. Yeah. And I have to remind myself, like, we do some work with, we call it scripting our responses, and it's not new, but like there's some mental scripting that I have to do in my head that goes, okay, this behavior is not about me. This thing that they're doing is not about me. It has something to do with who they are, and taking that off of my plate and being able to say, what good can I see in this? But it's intentional. It's hard work. Like it's not just sit back, do the normal thing, because as our kids, especially our bio kids, have grown, I've learned that they've caught a lot of things from just being around us as people. Like, and I don't think I ever realized that until I've seen them as they've gotten older, like the things that they do, or the way that they pitch in, and the way that they automatically do things, I've taken for granted because they've seen us do it their entire lives. And now the kids that have come into our home have not seen that. And so when they don't automatically do that, I'm like, what am I doing wrong? Or like, how have I not taught them to do that? But a lot of that is caught rather than just because I said so. And I have to remind myself of that, have grace for that, and see them in a little different light and go, okay, what good things can I see and cultivate? Because again, more positive interactions with me and them cultivates more positive interactions.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So did you guys reach a point, where you recognized you needed more training? You had been listening to podcasts, and you did have the foster parent training, which, is a required part of the process to get licensed and whatnot. But, was there a point where you were like, we need some more help? And we need some more formal training?
Yeah, I think that started our second hosting, which we said was because our first hosting experience, these kiddos had a strong father figure in their lives, and they had all these resources poured into them, and they were in a really good place. And then our second hosting, these girls, like I remember the one moment that kind of helped me see things differently with these girls. We were teaching them to ride bikes because they had never done it before. And this, I want to say Nika was around 12 years old at the time. And so she's riding a bike, wobbling down the road, and she falls and she scrapes her knee. And I run over there to scoop her up and just love on her and give her a Band-Aid and do the whole thing. And she sees me coming, and she jumps back up on the bike and pedals away as fast as she can.
Like, and bleeding. Like, yeah,
she's bleeding down her leg. She's bleeding down her leg, and all she wants to do is get away from me because in her defense, she doesn't know what I'm coming there to do. I'm coming there to try to comfort and provide care and all these things. And I'm like, okay, like there are more things going on here, and I need to change my approach, Yeah.
She didn't even know that a dad figure fixes boo-boos and can make things all better. And
right.
It's funny
because from her perspective, I could be coming there to like yell at her and scold her and what do you wreck this bike? Like there's all kinds of things that could have been going on there, and we had to they needed at nighttime, they wouldn't sleep unless it was like as
daylight
bright in their rooms. Like you turn the lights out at night, and they would they were not okay with that. They were super uncomfortable and stuff. And we ended up putting 6 flashlights in there. It's I could have just left the overhead light on for cheaper, but but it's what they needed. They needed something different.
Feel
and
safe.
it was kind of in that process that we're like, boy, I'm like, maybe we don't know as much as we think we know about this, about trauma and about these things. And so we started talking to other families at the time that we, that had done hosting or that had adopted and stuff like that. And that kind of started us deeper into reading more books and taking more trainings. And the more of those we took, the more we're like, wow, there's a lot we don't know.
Yeah.
Well, and we also too, through like this whole process, one of our biological kids, there were some things going on with him, and that was like our fifth kid. And at this point, we're like, that's not typical. Like, if he was our first, we would probably like, oh, that's just typical boy behavior, and that was not the case. And so we dug in deeper to that, and he ended up getting a diagnosis. And we started going, okay, things that we did with all the other four kids are not going to work with him. We have to change our approach. And that was like a daily practice of doing things differently and trying to figure out how we as the parents needed to grow and change. And as a result, I think it got us in this mindset that we always need to be growing and learning and reading and applying new principles to be able to help our kids, because our kids are not going to be able to do that work themselves. And we have to be able to gently lead them into that. And it put a huge burden of responsibility on us to be like, we're the adults. We have to start figuring this stuff out and figuring out how to apply it, even if we don't feel like it.
Yeah. Yeah. Your story about the girl who had the accident with her bike and you wanted to support her like a dad just made me flashed a memory when our kids who we adopted from Ukraine, when the first three came home, the middle one, our daughter, was 7 at the time. And I remember she was had a friend over, next door neighbor, little girl about the same age, and Anna, our daughter, was jumping on the couch, like just jumping up and down on the couch. And my husband came into the room and was like, "We do not jump on the couch." And she literally mimicked him, like still jumping on the couch, like, "We did not to jump on the couch," like, the little Ukrainian accent. And like, I had to be careful because I wanted to laugh because it was so comical. But, at the same time, I just knew she didn't know that this is dad and he's the head of the household and he's the authority figure. And I'm not supposed to mimic him or make fun of him. But we were in their orphanage and it was all run by women. Like, I don't think we even saw a single man there the whole time we were there. The women, was the director of the orphanage was a woman. Everybody we saw was a woman. So I started thinking, I don't think she understands, this whole, she didn't understand how a family worked with a mom and a dad, but she definitely didn't understand the dad's role and that, you respect the dad and but it was pretty comical. Now she's 20, I don't know, 25. Like I told you, I can't keep track of how old everybody is.
Fine.
But they have a wonderful relationship. And, she calls her dad and asks for advice. So she eventually learned it over time, but it was kind of a funny, thing that had happened, but that brought my memory back to that. But anyway, so how old are the two kids now and what is it like now?
All right. So the two kiddos right now, one's got a birthday here in a few weeks. He'll be turning 17.
Wow.
And his sister just turned 14 here in December. So it's
wow. How old is your oldest biological, or what are their ages? If I can.
Yeah, no. So our oldest is 21.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, he'll be 22 this year, and then our youngest is 8.
Okay.
And then they range in that state. I mean, we basically twinned 2 of our kids because our 2 almost 14-year-olds are real close in age, and then our 17-year-old and one of our daughters were born the same year. So yeah. What is it like now?
What is it like now? It's different. I mean, it's interesting because it's different challenges. Like the 14-year-old girl, she's the one who has presents a lot more the kind of the FASD behaviors and kind of some of the cognitive delays and some of the struggles she has. Her brother, we suspect, has some alcohol exposure and stuff like that, but you wouldn't know it unless you really know him. It's kind of, it's one of those things that he really typifies kind of the invisible disability side of things.
Yes.
And so he does well. He's got a job right now, and he's kind of navigating school. And so with him, it's a lot of this trying to help him navigate how do I prepare to become a young adult? How do I, because he is dialed up on launching. He's ready to graduate and get a job and be on his own. And so it's trying to kind of balance what we see in him and what we feel like he needs and what he feels like he needs.
Yeah.
Right. Because if we just come down and tell him what he needs to do and how he needs to do things differently and all that, all he hears is he's not good enough. And how, and it starts a very negative relational cycle with him. And that's not good. That doesn't help us. That doesn't put us in a place to speak into his life and kind of guide him and stuff like that.
Well, I was going to say, I think one of the biggest things is, he's ready to launch, but he's ready to launch so he can do what he wants to do.
Yeah.
Because, we just had a conversation recently about this, and we're like, okay, all these restrictions, that you feel like we have, why do you think those are? And we kind of talked through them, and, it came down to, well, so we can all be on the same page that mom and dad aren't trying to be big jerks to you and make your life miserable and all this. He's like, no, you're not, and stuff. But, he still wants to do what he wants to do. And so, we don't have that fallback, because like with our older biological kids, their whole life has been negotiating with mom and dad. And, we tell our olders, we're like, you guys are the guinea pigs. And so, we adjust and we make changes as we go, but, just to give us the grace that, we thought we knew exactly what we were doing. And then as we go, we see how little we actually know. But really with our oldest adopted, it is more along the lines of how can we see the good in him? How can we speak into that? And I kind of call it keeping the ledger short in the sense that it can be real easy as a mom, especially, to take all these little things, well, I asked you to do that and then you chose to do something else. Or I told you to do this and you didn't do that. Or when I asked you to take out the garbage, you rolled your eyes and complained about how awful it was, and it's real easy for me to get in a negative mindset about that. And so I tend to try to be like, own my own stuff. Hey, bud, you did that. It really hurt my feelings. Or, like own up to that and call it out and not let that fester in my own self. Because then when the opportunities arise to have a positive interaction with him, it's more likely to do that. Like I'm a very physical, like huggy, like, person. Like I hang on some of my kids sometimes, and it's harder sometimes with him in that because that we are at odds sometimes. And so I find, knowing myself, I find that if I address the elephant in the room, so to speak, hey, maybe next time I ask you to take out the trash, you just say, okay, mom, rather than just holding on to that and being like, gosh, every time I ask him, this, and this happens. I find myself being more willing to be more affectionate. And, it's a tricky situation with a, 17-year-old boy, but we're working on that. Like, again, I always see it as a work in progress. With our daughter, I think we're still trying to work that out. She still is very sad about her biological parents. And I just thank God that he's given us the grace to be able to not see that as competition. Like it's never, you missed your biological parents, that's something against me. Like I have genuine compassion in my heart. I'm like, baby, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry that you missed them or that you had a dream about them that made you sad. And I can give her a hug and I can really empathize with her. I can't change it, but I'm so grateful that I can take that mentality for her, because I know that it can be really hard. It can feel like I'm pushing you away because I miss the people that I should have been with. Right. And so I'm just grateful for that aspect of it, because it is something, almost every day, It's
Yeah, I would say she cries
Mm.
probably every day about it a little bit. And some
yeah.
days it's bigger than others, but it's, it's a real struggle for her right now.
Right. And especially just, getting older and transitions coming up in school and just trying to find ways to incorporate her more into daily life. I mean, right now she's in public school and we've talked about what does it look like if we change? Because we are a homeschooling family. They have been in public school because that's what they've wanted. And it's kind of been like, well,
It's what they've known.
it's what they've known, and it's also been like that's the supports that they've gotten and stuff like that so far. And we're starting to go, well, how do we incorporate her more into everyday, and I find myself missing her when she's gone. We're doing something together, I'm like, oh, I wish she was here. So that's a good sign to me of just like, oh, okay, how do we draw her closer and help her be more ingrained with what everybody else is doing.
Yeah. And I think it's going back to the part where she misses her biological parents. That's, we're wired, right, to need to be connected to them. And I know for me, what helped me was my own personal story where my parents divorced when I was 5 or 6, and my biological father left the state, moved to another state, and was barely in my life after that. But I always knew, that I had, this dad, and he would, maybe once a year kind of roll through town, and he was an over-the-road truck driver, so he literally would roll through town and stay with my grandparents, his parents, and then I would know he was in town. My brother and I would want to go see him and all of that. So I could understand on some level, and when our daughter who came in through the kinship adoption, her biological mom had died of cancer, but she knew she had a dad out there, and he had abandoned that family when Missy was an infant, hadn't been in her life. But boy, when she turned 18, she started searching for him back in the olden days when there was MySpace. Remember MySpace?
Oh, yeah.
She'd gotten one of the, and she did find him. And I have to say that because we parented her without understanding trauma. So we did the consequences, right? So it was always like, whatever, you didn't do what you're supposed to do or whatever. It was early bedtime because that was how I felt like I'm going to get a break because she'll be in bed and I don't have to deal with her. And but she would go to her room and she wasn't thinking, oh, I don't like going to bed early, so next time I'm gonna make sure I do my chores or whatever. I'll do my homework because I don't like being, going to bed early. No, the way her mind processed that was if my mother hadn't died, this wouldn't be happening to me. If I find my father, my biological father, he'll rescue me and I won't have to, be suffering through this. So she never made the connection, that we would typically think the consequence should, um, trigger. But she did find the biological father and he kind of sort of did communicate with her online. But he didn't ride in on the white horse like a knight in shining armor and come. He had moved to Florida, I think, and we live in New York. He didn't, ride into town and rescue her like she thought. So it was like re-traumatizing, right? She experienced rejection all over again. She did get to eventually meet him. He had remarried, he had a child with another woman, so she found out she had a half brother. But really, her whole life, she imagined one thing and that didn't happen. And she experienced that rejection again. But, you know, I can understand I know I have a dad out there somewhere. I want to find him and meet him. Right. So, the biological parent, good, bad, or ugly doesn't, that doesn't disappear. So understanding it's not about me, it's not a rejection of me as the mom. I understand where that desire comes from, but being able to support them in, navigating that rejection and what that, it isn't what they wanted it to be, is a big part of what we have to do as parents, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a whole, we have the perspective of our lives and we
Yeah.
bring children into our home and, our lives change and, are disrupted in whatever way. And, we have to adjust in whatever, but we forget sometimes that our kids have a complete, it's just like moving to a foreign country with no, you don't know any of the rules, any of the nuances of things. And that's really tough.
Oh, I had a really good story. And this is something that I think it's something that not all of our extended family understood. And there's a story I had with my parents, because like I said, we finalized in December of 21 with our kiddos, and my parents love to get the kiddos a Christmas ornament with their birth year on it and things like that. And my dad, he's trying to include our adopted kiddos. He's like, well, what year should I put on there? Should I put the year that they were adopted? I'm like, Dad, that's not the year they were born. Well, that's when they came into your family. That's, like it didn't even register to him. And it kind of opened the whole conversation with my dad. I'm like, they've had an entire life before moving. Like, they've only lived here for, at that point, like a year and a half ish. I'm like, and this kid is 13 years old. Like, the vast majority of his life has not been here. And like, we need to acknowledge and know that is very real, and that doesn't just go away when we adopt them. Like, and so it was a whole thing for experience for our extended family to kind of process and work through that.
Sandra Flach, host of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, and FASD educator Debbie Raymond invite you to join Hope for the FASD Journey, a virtual support community for parents and caregivers raising individuals with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, diagnosed or not. This faith-based support community meets online 3 times each month, features special VIP guests, and a private Facebook group for members only, which includes Soul Care Saturday video devotionals led by Sandra and Deb. Both Sandra and Deb are adoptive moms raising kids with FASD and facilitators of the Facets neurobehavioral model. For details and to register, visit justicefororphansny.org/hope-community. That's justicefororphansny.org/hope-community.
So let's pivot for a second here, because you guys created and host the Connected Parenting Minute podcast. So tell us, what led you to start it? Tell us about your show.
It's funny. What actually started it is we've gotten to know Ryan and Kayla North from the Empowered Parent podcast. And it all started back when we went to the Tapestry conference that they hosted. And I had been on a dad's panel up on stage, and it was great. It was me and Ryan North and Jason Johnson and a friend of ours, Tony Fergozo. And Chris Turner hosted and asked a few questions for the dads in the audience here perspective from dads. And I remember he asked a question, and Ryan and Jason got to answer it, and I didn't get a chance to because we ran out of time. I'm like, oh, I had something really good to say there. I really wanted to put my piece out there. And so then it bugged me for a few weeks. And then I finally went on Instagram and I recorded a reel, like a 1-minute reel and I just asked myself the question and then responded to it or whatever. And it got 2,000, 3,000 views or something like that. Like, wow. Okay. And so I went through and I made these little 1-minute reels on Instagram, and that's where the Connected Parenting Minute came from. And so I think I made 40 or 50 of these. And then at some point we're people, there's people like these. It's it's engaging, it's helping people. And so then we just started saying, we can turn this into a podcast and reach more people, because not everybody's on Instagram. Not everybody wants to sit there and listen to a parenting reel. And so from that, we started back, April of 23, I think it was. So we're coming up on 2 years now that we've been doing the podcast, and we've got about 30 episodes out there right now where we've had just discussions on connected parenting. And the idea is to try to make it into a practice, rather than this kind of big pie in the sky, I'm going to be a nice parent, or I'm going to be a gentle parent, or whatever. We're trying to take all the things we've learned from parenting our kiddos that have neurodiversity and from trauma and all that stuff, and try to just break it down. How can I give you a quick 1-minute tip, or a quick, a 20-minute explanation of like quick little tips of things that you can practically do today to help your kiddos out.
Right. Because I mean, really what it comes down to is, like Will said, it can be overwhelming of just this, okay, I can, learn all of these things, but really you can only do things little by little. And so the idea is to give some, hopefully spark some little like, oh, I could do that, or I can try that next time we have that interaction. And, if it weren't for so many amazing people like yourself that said, hey, I know something about this, let me start talking about it and helping other people just know a little bit more about something that is important. Because I mean, like, strong families are so important. Being able to parent our children well, and we'll never, know all of the things, right? Us, you, anybody. And but little bit by little bit, we can just do a little bit better. And so that's kind of our hope, is that as we talk about the things, as we get to experience them, half the time I say I love teaching and talking about things because it makes me the better parent. I'm like, I can't go talk 20 minutes on a podcast about being patient with my kid and then turn around and be yelling at them. And so, it gives us new ideas and us the opportunity to discuss back and forth. Well, what do we really think about that? Or how can we apply that principle? Or what is the story that, we experience that, and how we apply this concept. And so I think I think as much as I enjoy helping other parents, which I'm 100% all the time, I'm like, people have a question, by all means, reach out. I will be happy to talk to you through it, talk you through it, or ask you good questions. But really it comes down to, I'm the one who's blessed because I get the opportunity to mold these things over and really consider how we're parenting our kids and how we can do better, because really all we can influence are the people we're in direct contact with on a regular basis. I think it's all about growth and just that little, I just love that, like 1 minute at a time, like it's just one little thing. So.
And I've been listening. So since I met you guys back in October and found out you had a podcast, I became a follower. So I've been trying to get caught up on those 30 episodes and have been enjoying them very, very much. So where does your podcast live? Where can our listeners find your podcast?
Our podcast, it should be on all the platforms. So
Okay.
Apple Podcasts and Spotify are kind of the two biggest ones right now, but it's on Podbean, it's on all the Stitcher. I forget all the little smaller ones, but it
Okay.
should be available everywhere.
Should be easy to find.
Yeah, on YouTube. You're right.
And YouTube. Yeah.
And it's called the Connected Parenting Minute.
And you both host it together because you're both in the conversation, which I love too. So you have a website also called the connectedparentingminute.com, I believe, right, is where our listeners can find that. And I noticed on there you offer parent coaching. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the best things about, when you're asking those questions, when you're asking yourself as a parent, well, what can I do better? What can I do that I don't know? Like you said, you didn't know anything about trauma parenting, right? And so as we start to ask ourselves those questions, sometimes it is really helpful to talk to somebody that hasn't experienced those types of things, or like, where do I start? And just those basic questions of like, I don't even know what to do. And so, I mean, like, I've been working on coaching families that I've actually hosted through hosting organizations. And that's actually one of my favorite things to do, because I get to know the families a little bit. I get to talk, gauge where they're at, but also really encourage them in the things that we have experienced that they might not know anything about, and walk them through that process of hosting, and hopefully help answer those questions that they have. Some parents have kids, other parents don't have any kids, and so it's been it's been a blessing to be able to just walk them through that and be present with them, give them some tips, some ideas of things maybe they hadn't thought about before, because we have experienced a big gamut of things, and I don't have all the answers, but being able to talk through the scenarios and be like, oh, have you thought about trying this? Or have you thought about this? Because those are things, we don't know what we don't know. And so that's been really fun. And we've enjoyed doing that. We always are willing to talk to parents and help them out in any way that we can. Will's really great. He normally hosts like a dad's Zoom during a hosting season, just to talk to dads, especially because sometimes that can be a whole nother thing too. And so we've enjoyed doing that, and we're just kind of walking that as our kids get older and what we do, and helping other parents.
Yeah, that's great.
I love that. So, and you guys also travel and speak at various adoption and foster care conferences, like the one we met at. Any upcoming speaking engagements?
Yeah, we are going to be speaking at the conference, which is in Kansas City at the end of February. I believe it's February 21st and 22nd in 2025. And so we're looking forward to talking about that. We're going to be doing a panel that we call From Eye Rolls to Real Conversations. And it's all about practical strategies for relating with teens, because we had early on in our marriage, we had one couple that kind of poured into us that kind of had the perspective of teenagers are great. I love having teenagers. They're so fun to hang out with. And like, we really kind of grasped onto that. And we're just like, that's who we want to be when we grow up, And so there's a lot of things that we've learned through the years that have really put us in a place where we've got a pretty good relationship with most of our teens. 6 of our 8 children are teenagers
right now.
Teenagers are above right now. So we have practical everyday experience with this, but yeah, we're speaking on that. And then we've submitted for a couple other conferences coming up in 2025, but those are yet to be announced. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll connect at those conferences. Hopefully our paths will cross again. And we will put in the show notes for this episode how our listeners can find you at theconnectedparentingminute.com. So you guys chose the scripture that I opened with, Colossians 3:17. I'll read it again. And whatever you do in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. Why did you pick that verse?
Well, I thought about this, and really it comes down to, we have moment by moment interactions with everyone around us, but especially our kids. And really, when it comes down to it, we're responsible to God and how we interact with our children. And so when we start breaking it down and saying, this interaction God is seeing, God is present in, how can I be honoring to him through it? Because how I act with my kids, how I talk to my kids, how I perceive my kids, how I talk about my kids are all going to have a lifelong effect on my children. And we really want God to be the center as our children grow up. But we recognize that it's not going to come just because we tell them to read the Bible or we read script, we can do all those things and those are important, but really it comes down to those moment by moment interactions and how we're honoring God through those.
That's beautiful. I couldn't say it better myself.
Yeah, I love that. Love that so much. So you guys know our listeners are primarily adoptive and foster parents, like we all are. So I'd like us to wrap up today by giving you both the opportunity individually to share some words of encouragement. So Will, if you could maybe speak to the dads, and CarrieAnn to the moms, I'm sure we can take away from whatever each of you say, but let's wrap up with some words of encouragement.
Yeah, I guess to the foster and adoptive dads out there, it's easy to feel a lack of respect. It's easy to feel hurt. It's easy to get real protective of your wife. There's all these feelings that are normal and natural for dads to feel. And I think that the thing that I have always found encouraging is that there are other dads out there. You're not the only one that wants to connect well with your kids. You're not the only one that wants to do better with the trauma, that wants to do better with the struggling, with the frustrating behaviors. And it's very easy to see the kind of the caricature of masculinity that's out there in our culture today and feel very let down and feel very disappointed. And so I just want to encourage that any dads out there listening, like there's others of us out there that really care, that love the Lord, that want to do well by our family, and are doing the hard fight of trying to connect well with our kids. And so you're not alone. You're not the only one. Listen to the podcast, reach out to me. I'd love to have a Zoom call with you or a phone call with you and just chat, and trying to connect with other dads that are on the same journey with you has been just deeply meaningful and important for me, and encouraging for me as a dad to kind of help me when I'm having a rough week or a rough night and stuff like that. So don't let yourself believe the lie that you're alone.
Oh, it's good.
Mm.
For me, gosh, I mean, there's so many things. And I think one of the biggest things that has been a growth point for me is getting to know who God made in me. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, but God is also creating someone in me. And it's not over because, we're done adding to our family, or because I've achieved a certain amount of status, or, checked all the boxes from the day. But God is still working on me, and I still have so many things to learn, but I can't do them all. I've learned recently about myself that I actually have ADHD. And for me, that was really insightful, just knowing how God made my brain, and it's given me a lot more grace for myself, because I know that I tend to think that I can do all the things and then feel all the guilt when I don't accomplish them. And so really, I think encouraging moms to have grace for themselves, that, you know what, do today well. And that's all that matters. Like, and even if you don't do today well, hopefully you get tomorrow and you can work on that well. We take on all the guilt I do. I mean, I so take on all the guilt for not getting all the things done and acting right, and, getting frustrated with this, that, or the other thing. But really, God's given us today. And so just give yourself the grace that today is okay. And I'll just keep striving forward, and it'll be okay.
I love that. Thank you guys so much. Will, CarrieAnn, thank you for all that you're doing to support adoptive and foster families through your podcast and your platform. So grateful to have met you guys, and hopefully, again, we'll be connected at future events for sure. But thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you guys for listening to the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Will and CarrieAnn Standfest. I hope you were inspired and encouraged by what we talked about today. And in addition to encouraging you, I want to equip you for your parenting journey. You heard our commercial about the Hope for the FASD Journey support group, our online community. And I hope that you will take advantage of that if you suspect that you are parenting kiddos who were prenatally exposed to alcohol, whether they're diagnosed or not. Most of our members don't have a formal diagnosis. They just highly suspect that there was prenatal exposure, and are just needing a support community to navigate. So I hope that you will check that out. And I have FASD workshops and training and coaching as well. I am a mom of a 19 and 21-year-old, both diagnosed with fetal alcohol syndrome. And I spent years trying to figure out, what are these behaviors? Is it because of the trauma? Is it because they were teenagers? Is it because they were prenatally exposed? We became trauma informed. We'd parented other teenagers before, but it was often, what is going on here? We have connection, we have attachment. What is going on? And then I got professional training on FASD to help our kids and realized how many of you out there are also struggling with these big behaviors and, have tried everything and are trauma informed and equipped, and still it's hard, next level hard. So I want to offer you resources that we did not have in our early days of parenting our kids. So if you go to our website, justicefororphans.ny.org, at the top of the homepage there, you can either click on resources and see in the drop down FASD. You'll find there all of the links and information about our training, about the coaching, about the support group. Or if you just want to sign up for a workshop that is right now on the schedule, you can just click registration. So that will take you there as well. Every month I offer a free intro to FASD. So it's 60 minutes of training, and I stay on for Q&A. So it's live through Zoom. And then I also typically offer a 3-hour more deep dive session. And then this spring, later this spring, I'm going to be offering a 6-week, 18 hours worth of content using the Facets neurobehavioral model, walk through FASD and other brain-based conditions and how to accommodate and support our kiddos for success. So you can check all of that out on our website, justicefororphansny.org. Also, if you want to read my blog, connect with me more, also, my personal website is sandraflach.com. Of course, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast on whatever platform that you are listening to. Also, we are on YouTube under Justice for Orphans YouTube channel. All of the video versions of this podcast live, and we've got some other great podcasts or videos that we have produced that are on the YouTube channel as well. So I invite you to check those out and make sure you follow us on social media. Justice for Orphans is on both Instagram and Facebook, as well as me, Sandra Flach. You can find me on those platforms as well. So connect with me there. And my personal email, or my email where you can email me personally, because I open them and read them and I will respond to you personally, also in the show notes for this episode. So check all of that out. And again, I am grateful that you spent your valuable time with me today. I'm thrilled to have you along for the journey.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Adoption and Foster Care Journey podcast, brought to you by Justice for Orphans. We hope you were encouraged today. Please be sure to subscribe to this podcast and leave a review, and share it with your fellow foster and adoptive parent friends so they can be encouraged too. Be sure to find and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Justice for Orphans, and check out our website for vital resources at justicefororphansny.org.